Today's gospel tends to be read by Christians as burdensome, but I don't think that it needs to be overwhelming. Let me explain. Christ tells a crowd the parable of the sower. Different seed lands on different soil. Some seeds die, some grow initially but do not flourish, and some thrive. As Christians, we have the desire to make sure that all the seeds flourish. We want to save everyone, to make sure that all the seeds fall on fertile soil. It hurts us to see how lost some can be, maybe even people close to us. Well, it is certainly better for us to care about others than not to care at all, but there is even a further level of spiritual growth I want to talk to you about today. The parable is not saying that the poor growth in some instances was the sower's fault for not aiming better. We sow love everywhere we can, and then we allow those seeds to develop as they will. We know that some love will take root, and some will fall on rock. As long as we are certain of our own hearts when dealing with others, we do not need to feel overburdened about the results. This approach may not entirely calm the concerns of those who care deeply about their fellow human beings. I understand that. People may find that when they reach out to a friend or a relative and it has no apparent effect, it still burdens their hearts, even though they accept that it is not their own fault. This burden is heavier or lighter depending on one's theology. I can offer, in other words, even more relief for those who lean towards universalism, the theology that eventually all people make it back to God. If, on the other hand, you hold that one who does not make the right choice here will suffer eternally, then I don't see a way around a certain level of sadness when the seed does not take root within your knowing. There is precedent for universalism in Anglicanism, and the Bible gives no real indication one way or the other. Christ talks about the eternal fires of hell, but does not mention an eternity spent there. More recently, C.S. Lewis wrote that he thought the gates of hell were locked from the inside, a famous quote. In other words, though we might make our own hell for a while by wandering far from God, there's always hope that we will eventually learn our lesson and turn back to God. Universalists like myself believe that at some point everyone finds her way, whether in this life or afterward. People whom we meet, of course, are at different levels of spiritual development. Some are rock, some are fertile soil. So our seeds may or may not take immediate root. As Paul tells the Romans about the Jews who consider it sufficient merely to follow the law. My heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. I can testify that they have a zeal for God, but it's not enlightened. For being ignorant of the righteousness that comes from God and seeking to establish their own righteousness, they have not submitted to God's righteousness. In other words, they seek to prove themselves worthy by following the law rather than humbly allowing God to work through them to bring loving relationships to others. Long story short, a person who follows all the rules perfectly but does not love is not on the path to salvation. But a person who is deeply flawed yet who knows how to love is on the path towards God. Universalism is confident that each person eventually will turn towards God, whether in this life or afterwards. There's nothing in the Bible that says that growth stops at death. Judgment may not be final, in other words, but a progress check-in, as it were. You can see how universalism makes evangelizing much less fraught with anxiety. One can witness, be an icon of love in the world, and know that overall it is helping. Others may reflect on that example in this life or the next. This frees us to love without needing to see immediate results. We simply love others and let it be. We love for the sake of love rather than for the sake of results. We leave the rest to God, who has eternity to work things out with each of us. But there's one caveat. When I say love, I do not mean giving others everything that they desire in the present. We do not primarily, I think we do that primarily to make ourselves feel better. It's not about any real assessment of what other people need for the long term. Love sometimes means saying no. This leaves one question. How do we know whether we are fertile ground or not? Well, Paul gives us a clue here. He writes to the community in Rome, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit." In other words, if we are egoistic and self-involved, even about how good we are at being good, we are heading in the wrong direction. If we have set our minds on God, who is love, and not as a mere sentimentality, but a true desire for the well-being of all that leads to concrete practices, then we are on the path of growth. We are heading towards God. To set the mind on the flesh is death, explains Paul, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. We may not be as spiritually advanced as we would like at any given time, but if we are on the right path, then we can have peace in our hearts. So take joy in the process of loving others, of planting seeds, and of knowing that, in the end, love is never wasted. This is, of course, countercultural. Outside of church, how often do we hear about the importance of spiritual growth? We live in a society that emphasizes competition, results, and outward success. The result is that we are encouraged to be self-focused, to see ourselves as utterly independent of others rather than as a part of others. This is how the story is told, and anything that contradicts it does not gain purchase. There's so much pushing in the other direction. Such an approach robs us of the joy of just being, of entering into each experience, not with an eye to how we can use it to promote or to prove ourselves, but just as something we might enjoy, something from which we might learn. We learn, after all, from playing. If we are always pressing on to the next thing, always trying to collect another experience to make sure that our storehouse is bigger than our neighbors, then we are left isolated, self-focused, in the flesh, as Paul would say. As a society, we do not celebrate common achievements or think in terms of common goals. Whatever we may want to think, everything around us is saying, your ability to love is pointless. You are only worth as much as your concrete achievements. No commercials talk about the quality of one's soul, except as some sort of cheap manipulation. Everything points outside, away from, and back to the isolated individual. And indeed, we give passes to people who have accomplished a lot, who have a lot of money, even though they are not loving and have not done loving things. To help reclaim some of that joy, some of the joy of loving others, keep in mind the real reason that we exist. We are shedding light into the universe. The results of this are not at all evident to us, perhaps, but they are joyous nonetheless. You can feel that joy. And if you don't believe me, just try it. Try loving others, not as mere sentimentality, as I said, but by actually caring for their long-term well-being, and see how it changes things. And let yourself enjoy that. Amen.